One experiment documented the time it took for 3-day-old babies to freeze to death. Who would you put in the same category of evil as Hitler? Pol Pot. 100% him. My mother, who was 9 at the start, and her entire family were forced out of their home at gunpoint, marched to the countryside where they were separated into different camps and forced to farm without having any background knowledge on farming methods. She was forced to change her name since her birth name was considered too intellectual fancy. She worked from sunrise to sundown, and if she didn't meet her quota she wasn't allowed to eat. They were only fed rice porridge as well. So many people tried to survive by eating bark, insects or whatever they could sneak, and if they were caught they were beaten or killed. Many women and young girls were beaten and raped regularly. My mother has vivid memories of seeing corpses that were mutilated and violated. She also witnessed babies being killed by having their heads smashed against trees. One of her brothers was axed to death for asking for food. There are so many other dark and brutal stories that she has about that time. It hurts to think about all that she went through and makes me appreciate my life so much more. Jimmy Savile, beloved UK talk show host, spent his whole life raising money for charity and a large portion of his career granting wishes for children. So far sounds like a nice guy, right? After his death, an investigation is launched into allegations of child abuse against him, police concluding that he was a prolific child molester. Savile is estimated to have sexually abused up to 500 people in his life, spanning from 1955 to 2009. The charity work? All a clever method of luring vulnerable people for Savile. Many of his victims were those within the charities, care homes and hospitals he worked for. Some even backstage on the shows he presented. Ante Pavelic, founder of the fascist Ustaše movement in Yugoslavia. Whereas the Nazis had enormous industrial might and significant wealth, the Ustaše had to oppress, torture, and murder innocent people on a tight budget. This meant herding entire villages to a cliff face, forcing men, women, and children to jump to their deaths, then burying them where they landed. It meant burning villages and bayoneting people as they fled. It meant knives, bludgeons, hammers, and shovels rather than bullets and gas chambers. The Ustaše were virulently anti-Semitic, anti-Serb, and anti-anyone who wasn't a full-throated supporter of the movement. Their crimes against humanity were so vile that Nazi officials who visited went back home horrified and disgusted by the brutality. Hitler actually told Pavelic to take it down a notch. Didn't work. After the war, Yugoslavs wanted to round up every Ustaše, or uninvolved Croat, and slaughter them. Tito had to keep the lid on civil war, so he stepped in with his own brutal measures. Ustaše members and political opponents, as well as plenty of innocent bystanders, were executed or imprisoned. Tito didn't know what else to do to avoid the inevitable reprisals. Hitler was a vile, brutal fascist. Pavelic was a vile, brutal fascist from the discount bin. Thomas Midgley, the inventor of leaded gasoline. As a chemist for GM, he did a ton of press to convince the public it was safe, knowing full well how incredibly dangerous it would be. He even famously smelled the fumes of a cup of the stuff at a press conference to convince people it was safe. After leaded gasoline got approval for production, he took a long hiatus to recover from poisoning himself. GM became richer than God, and it is estimated that millions of people had significant impact to their mental health and life expectancy thanks to the lead, which is now illegal in almost every United Nations country. Leaded gas, which he knew was unsafe, was not his only invention. He also invented Freon 12 in the class of chemicals known as CFCs. He is personally responsible for some of the worst global environmental issues we've faced, the poisoning of multiple generations, and nearly destroying our ozone. He also contracted polio and invented a machine to lift him in and out of his bed. He got tangled in it, and the machine strangled him to death. A far better death than he deserved. Andrew Jackson. The guy was an absolute psychopath, and he's still on the $20 bill. He enacted what was quite literally genocide and ethnic cleansing of the Native Americans through his Indian Removal Act and Trail of Tears. I mean, attempting to exterminate or remove every Indian east of the Mississippi is no small deal. Jackson also stole his wife, who was already married, by chasing her husband into a canebrake with a Bowie knife, trying to stab him, running him out of the county for good at the threat of his life. The Kim family, specifically Kim Jong-un, gives Hitler a run for his money. The whole country is surrounded by mines, so no one can leave island. People are forced into military service if they're over a certain height, the height requirement being an extremely low bar because the whole nation is getting shorter due to malnutrition. His friends kidnap young girls and force them to be sex slaves. The entire nation is brainwashed to hate the rest of the world and view them as lesser beings, especially South Koreans, Japanese, and Americans. They're brainwashed to believe the Kim family are gods with supernatural powers. People are regularly sent to work camps and prison for minor violations of the law. Everyone is required to have a photograph of Kim Jong-un and his father in their homes. If your house is burning down and you don't save the photos first, you can be killed. If dust is found on these photos, you can be killed. There's no concept of individuality or freedom there. The sick part is they tell North Koreans that this is paradise and everyone is envious of them. That's why evil American and South Korean capitalists supposedly hate North Koreans. China has backed North Korea since the Korean War, and the only reason North Koreans are suffering today is because of China. North Korea can't sustain itself without China's support. Another scary fact is even the limited internet that runs through Pyongyang is from China. So, not even Kim Jong-un has experienced free internet. North Korea is an entire country based on human rights violations. It's hell on earth, and the rest of the world has to sit back and watch, lest we start World War III and nuclear war with China. Surgeon General Shiro Ishii, director of Unit 731, the unit of the Japanese Imperial Army that orchestrated Japan's incomprehensibly cruel human experimentation and biological weapons testing during World War II. They vivisected babies, pregnant women, and just civilians in general, alive with no anesthesia and out of sheer sadistic curiosity. They locked people in massive freezers to see how long frostbite took to kill. Placed live kidnapped civilians on around grenades to see how the damage changed with distance, dropped bubonic plague bombs on villages. Despite some scientific findings, it's the shit they did for no reason other than sadistic pleasure or curiosity that makes them almost worse than the Nazis. Some of the tests have been described as psychopathically sadistic, with no conceivable military application. For example, one experiment documented the time it took for 3-day-old babies to freeze to death. Current Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. The crimes he and his allies committed have dropped Syria's population from 23 million pre-war to 11 million today. He systematically killed over 1 million Syrians. That is 1 out of every 23 people. Many of those killed were innocent and taken to killing prisons where they would be tortured and starved to death. He has used everything from chemical weapons to dropping massive garbage bins and barrels full of TNT on civilian population centers. All of this started after his nephew cut off the balls of a child who wrote, "Dr. Assad, you're next." In line with the Arab Spring, Russia fully supported his killing of Syrians, as does Iran. He has more than half Syria's population. How come no one has said that? He is a living Hitler. I'd say Shiro Ishii. He was the leader of a special research division of the Japanese Empire during World War II. He maybe didn't kill as many as Hitler, but he is to be remembered as a monster who tortured people in the name of science. He would let people starve to death, lock them in rooms to see how long it took them to die from thirst, cut people open and infect their inner organs with diseases to study immune reactions, cut off limbs and then reattach them to study blood loss and healing, had prisoners become target practice for flamethrowers and not let the victims die so they could study how the body heals from severe burns, allowed his men to rape female prisoners to study pregnancy and the mental health deteriorations of being raped. The list goes on. He is credited with the deaths of over 10,000 from his horrific experiments. He never faced justice for his crimes, as he struck a deal with the United States during Japan's surrender where he was given immunity in exchange for his research data. He later converted to Christianity before he died from throat cancer in 1959. But he still deserves to be in hell. Considering people have put names like Putin, Hussein, Gaddafi, and Ho Chi Minh, I'm surprised no one has said Xi Jinping, the current leader of China. He is currently guilty of genocide against mostly Kazakhs and Uyghurs in the far west of China, making wrongful claims of occupation over vast swaths of the Southwest Pacific, and generally employing a predatory foreign policy while aggressively silencing dissent at home. I don't think he stands to be anywhere near as bad as Hitler, but certainly among the ranks of these other characters. Of course, part of that foreign policy is the government using troll farms to downvote such criticisms and spread disinformation in response, so I'm holding my breath here. Who knows, maybe this video will get blocked like the others. Well, that's all for the videos guys. I hope you learned something and enjoyed it. Have an amazing day.